Good morning. Welcome to the Community Benefits Protocol Subcommittee meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order. A reminder that all electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function during committee meetings. Please note that quorum is present. The first item of business is the appointment of a chair and vice chair. May I please have nominations for the position of chair of the Community Benefits Protocol Subcommittee? Any nominations? Councillor Wilson.
Good morning. My apologies. I haven't had a chance to chat with her. Just wanted to know if Councillor Nan would take up the position of chair.
Councillor Nan, do you accept?
I appreciate the offer, but I'm happy to, well, I mean, I'm at the will of other committee members. If there was somebody else who was interested, that's fine. But if not, then I'm happy to take it on.
Councillor Wang?
I'd like to nominate Councillor Crutch, if he is so willing.
Councillor Crutch, do you accept the nomination?
Here we are in the realm of utter politeness, right? Notwithstanding that Councillor Nan didn't express a 100% desire to do so, I'm happy to take it on with her generous thumbs up.
Is there a seconder for the nomination, Councillor Nan?
Look at how fast they put up there.
Is there any further nominations? Seeing none, is there anyone opposed? That item is carried. Next, we'll move on to the appointment of the vice chair. May I have nominations for the position of vice chair? Councillor Wang.
I'd like to nominate member Carl Andrus, if he so chooses.
Carl, do you accept the nomination?
I do.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Nan, is there anyone opposed? That item is carried.
Thanks. I've now been given the magic instructions, so we can carry on. We'll go right to item 2, which is the approval of today's agenda. Clerk Gauthier, are there any changes to today's agenda?
No, there are no changes.
Okay, on that note, may I please have a mover and seconder to approve the agenda as presented? I see it moved by Councillor Huang, seconded by member Andrus. Any discussion on today's agenda?
Councillor Nan.
Councillor Nan.
Thank you, Chair Crutch. I do have an item that I will add at notices of motion if committee will accept it. It is to explore collaborations regarding landing some community benefits with the HSR maintenance and storage facility. I will circulate it by email to those committee members who I have email addresses for, but otherwise I will send it to the clerk. Thank you.
Okay, that's a change to the agenda. It's an amendment, so.
Just as amended.
Yep, so we're gonna, if no one's opposed to that, seeing none, we will vote on the agenda as amended. All those in favor, raise your hands of the amended agenda.
Aye.
Great, that's everyone. That carries. We're on to 3, which are declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest for today's meeting? Not seeing any. We'll carry on to item 9. Wow, 3 to 9. What a quick gallop. Consent items. So we're on to consent items. There are 2 consent items, and we're going to go through them each individually. They're the only 2 items except for the notice of motion on today's agenda. And 9.1 is the Community Benefits Protocol Subcommittee Terms of Reference. So may I please have a mover and a seconder to put this item on the floor? Moved by Councillor Nan, seconded by Councillor Taddison. Is there any discussion on this item? I'm not seeing any discussion, so we will vote on the item being received. All in favor?
In favor.
Any opposed? Seeing no opposed, that carries. And we're on to item 9.2, which is the Hamilton Community Benefits Protocol Update, HSC 23026. May I please have a mover and seconder to put the item on the floor? Moved by Councillor Huang, seconded by Member Andrus. Bonnie Elder, the Director of Ontario Works, is here and can provide an overview of the report if needed. I'll look at people's eyes. If somebody would like an overview of this report? I see Councillor Huang is giving a shake of the head. Councillor Chattison also with a raising of the hand. Okay, if you wouldn't mind, Director Elder, giving us an overview of the report.
Thank you. So today's report is just an information report to bring us through the history of what brought us here today and the creation of this subcommittee. So what we did was overview the direction that was provided by Council in August of 2022 at the General Issues Committee to bring forward to this subcommittee and identify what the priorities were going to be for this subcommittee, which include development of a protocol for use and prioritization of community benefits agreements in the City of Hamilton, to consider any opportunities for to include social procurement within publicly funded tenders, and to create a venue to inform, connect, and encourage community benefits and agreements in the city. In addition, this report does outline some of what could be considered by this subcommittee as first steps or initial things to be looked at in order to inform the direction that this subcommittee would like to provide to staff going forward. So it does highlight things such as completion of an environmental scan to identify other communities that have implemented community benefits frameworks and protocols, to determine what ongoing opportunities for leveraging within the city itself, to review existing city policies to ensure that or identify where there may be opportunities, and to look at the idea of community engagement, and to so what this report did was identify that these could be some of the initial steps that this subcommittee may want to consider going forward.
Thank you very much, Director Elder. I'll look to questions from folks. I see Member Andrus has a question. Put myself on the list at the end of first-time speakers, and Councillor Chattison. Member Andrus?
Thank you. Through the chair, thank you very much for this report. I think it outlines kind of the breadth and scope of the task before this committee. And as noted, based on conversations with the City of Toronto, it is a massive undertaking. It's a culture change. So I want to acknowledge everyone here through the chair for starting to take this journey with us. One of the questions I have that isn't outlined here and maybe subject to future committee meetings is two questions. One, I guess, is there was a pilot undertaken about 5 years ago through an outside consultant named Sandra Hamilton that pioneered some social procurement language in RFPs through the procurement process. And I'm wondering if, it's not laid out in this information report, but if there was, because that was a rather significant undertaking, I think, by the City of Hamilton, and provides some valuable data if it's within scope of the work that this committee is doing, that we'll hear from that. And then I have another follow-up question quickly.
So through the chair, I will also look to Tina to help inform this. One of the things that I did want to identify and put to you or make you aware of as it relates to the work that was done by Sandra Hamilton is that at the time that was undertaken, the City of Hamilton was actually a provider of employment services under the Ministry of Children's Community Services. We are no longer in that. We did receive there is a community organization that is now operating all of that, which led to a reduction in budgets, and that all happened in 2020, which was after that report. So again, I will request that possibly Tina could provide some additional information, but I just wanted to make sure that everyone was aware that some of the findings from what Sandra Hamilton provided as it related to the interconnections between the Ontario Works Division are no longer applicable. So I just would put that caution out there, and then through the chair request if additional information could come from Tina.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Tina. Yeah. Yeah, you're always good. Don't need to wait for me to go. Just go.
Through the chair, Tina Iacco, Manager of Procurement. In 2018, 2019, we did do some pilots with Sandra. We did a few RFPs that included some social value evaluation criteria in the RFPs to see if we could generate some interest from the vendor community and strike up some possible opportunities for youth at risk, for newcomers to Canada, women in the workforce, different sectors, and try to spark some social procurement in that respect.
Thank you. Through the chair, I understand and appreciate the limitations of the changes by the Conservative government to employment services in the Hamilton ecosystem. I would point out that the HCBN has, as part of its membership, most of the workforce development, social enterprises, and not-for-profit groups, including the YWCA, who's in attendance today, Path Employment Services, who worked with you before, as well as the Immigrant Working Center. So I think that there's probably threads that can be picked up from that, especially around the language. So I'm interested in looking at my peers on this committee in terms of how, and of course over to staff through the chair in terms of capacity to come back with at least some kind of brief outline of the work that was done in that report, and then make the consulting report possible. Can through the chair that be taken as a friendly direction, or will we require more of a formal?
I always think a motion is helpful for the record so everybody can track these things. So I think, if I understand correctly how these things work, members of council can put forward motions, I believe, and I'm not sure that members can put forward motions. So if a member of council is willing to put forward a motion to ask for a report back on that, that'd be helpful. But Elsie Gauthier, could you maybe intervene there?
Yeah, through the chair, members can put forward motions because they're voting members.
Oh, thank you so much. I wasn't sure how the format of this committee worked as opposed to, say, the LRT subcommittee, so thanks for that clarification. So, at your will, Member Andrus.
Thank you very much for that clarification. So very simply, I'd like to just put forward a quick motion to direct staff in procurement and other affected departments to report back to this committee with a summary of the pilots undertaken for the social RFP, as well as releasing the Sandra Hamilton report as part of the appendix of that report.
Great. Do I have a seconder for that? I see Councillor Huang on that. Any discussion on the motion itself? Are our staff okay and clear on what that is? I see lots of nodding heads, so the answer to that is yes. Great. We'll vote on that. All those in favor of the motion?
In favor?
Thank you. I see no one who's not in favor, so that's carried. Thank you so much. And now we'll go on to Councillor Huang, I think, who had a question. Oh, you had a question.
Do I have any more time?
Oh, apologies. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
One more quick question. In this report, I was also wondering, there's an economic development workforce strategy that's being undertaken by the ECDEV department, and I just wanted to get some clarification from economic development and how they saw that piece of their undertaking fitting with the work of this committee and with some of the things that we're going to undertake in this work. Thank you, through the chair.
Director Schlehan.
You can't speak to it in depth, but my understanding is and many of the organizations that you just talked to, Mr. Andrews, were part of that consultation process.
Thank you, Director Schlehan.
Sorry.
Member Andrews, yes.
Norm, can you just reiterate that again, because you didn't have your microphone?
Oh, sorry, just so everyone knows, Director Schlehan's microphone wasn't on, so he's going to say it all again.
Is my microphone, I'm on now? Okay. So just to reiterate, the consultation process did take into account many of the groups that Committee Member Andrews was referring to. So we're hopeful that those comments came through in the final report. It's a rather large report, and it should be posted within the next day or so.
Thank you. I'll look forward to reading that with the GIC minutes.
Thank you, Member Andrus. And now to you, Councillor Huang.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Along the same lines as Member Andrus, I think when it comes to economic, it's in the middle, Norm, like somewhere, yeah. There we go. Along the same lines as Member Andrus, I'd like to understand a little more from economic development how this community benefits is socialized with private sector and industry, and what is their sort of, are there any concerns, or are there any, like, what's their understanding of how we may want to move forward with industry and private sector?
Through to Councillor Wang, I think this is a really good opportunity because I'm not sure that industry has a fulsome understanding of this. So I think this is the reason that I was brought forward to the table was that for us to be able to help and educate our industry on what social procurement is and how they can use it to their advantage actually in the process. So I think part of this is going to be a very large education factor, Councillor.
As follow-up through you, Chair, social procurement is a very large part of this, but at the same time, community benefit could also be the investment into an arena space, and I'm looking at Councillor Tattison, or it could be a opportunity for parkettes or anything that, as it relates to what is built for and will be used for the community. So I wonder, we've already socialized the idea of development charges with them, but perhaps this is, I suppose I would like to understand what is the action plan moving forward to really get them to sort of shift focuses from a development charge argument to now a community benefit sort of argument.
Can I just ask for a clarification on the question there, Councillor? Sorry, that's...
I think that for community benefit, social procurement is absolutely one of the top parts of community benefit, but it can also be the investment in, say, physical assets, capital assets. It could be a parquet. I'm kind of wondering what's the action plan to start to socialize this aspect of it, kind of taking them away from the idea of what is a development charge and where we would use development charges to this idea now of how is this a community benefit, private sector, industry? How do we get them to start thinking like those, like
okay.
Yeah. So.
Thank you. Thank you for the clarification. And I guess at this point, I don't know what that action plan is. And I think that's coming around this table is going to, and I think, again, that's why I'm here as well, is basically try to gain that understanding and have that communication as well, because I don't think it's quite there yet.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Those are all my questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Huang. And Councillor Tattison, did you have questions, if I recall?
I think I do.
Okay, great.
Just when, and I guess it's through the chair to Bonnie, in terms of reviewing city policies, and when I'm thinking of, I don't even know the terminology, but I guess it's like if we have a developer who is building in a certain area and they're willing to tender, so to develop something down the road, I guess my question is, does that have to go out through the tendering process, or are there ways to, circumvent that so that the people that are actually working in the area just can extend capital investment, say, to an arena or a community center?
Do you understand the question, or? I think I do, but I can ask. Go ahead.
So I would just say I'm not sure that I'm the one to answer that question. I might look to Tina, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So through the chair, if I can understand your question, would this be in the situation where where a developer is developing a survey, if you will, new houses and so on and so forth? Are you asking, Councillor, if the developer needs to go through a tender process, or if the city does, if you can just give me some clarification.
No, you know what, I'm going to take that one offline and just pursue another avenue, because that's not for this committee at this moment in time. One of the things I am looking at is when we say social investment, I guess, is dealing with our city assets. So we have a number of kitchens all throughout the city that are sitting idle. Is this the committee that it would be under their purview to look at those to improve the capacity of those kitchens in order to, what would I say, in order to be beneficial to food security for organizations?
I would probably say that, just to intervene if it's okay, I don't think that's really under the mandate of this committee, right? So we're looking, the community benefits, broadly speaking, are part and parcel with development that's happening or ongoing, right? So I guess if magically there was a development that was occurring right beside a kitchen space and there was some connection between that development and the kitchen space, that could be a conversation, or if it was done in that community. But we're not really directing those kinds of broad community benefits from this committee. We're sort of more so looking at a bit of a finer scope.
So kind of maybe channeling our development fees and so forth into social benefits for the community as they're building or developing in the areas, correct?
Without without saying too much and like trying to be too authoritative about this, I think the point of this, and please correct me if I'm wrong, other members of the committee or staff, there's an exchange that goes on with community benefits. There's a relationship, there's a negotiation, there's a discussion about a framework of what we're going to look at with respect to community benefits, and the charge of this committee is to try and develop that framework and develop what those community benefits are, what the situations we're going to be in where we can have community benefits arriving out of these negotiations, but not that we're actively like providing the community benefits ourselves, right? So I think that we're here to try and develop that more. I see Councillor Nan's hand up, and Councillor Nan, go ahead.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Just also wanting to make sure our scope is clear. The conversation about a community benefits protocol is as it relates to city tenders, city capital, city infrastructure, was my understanding is the scope of what we're going to be focusing on, so that we can maximize community benefits as we are pursuing all large-scale infrastructure and capital projects that are within the realm of the municipality. So, i.e., we're about to go do this thing, we're about to go build a thing. That thing is going to benefit our city because of the nature of the thing, but by the how we do it and the negotiations we have with potential contractors, we embed other community benefits that we would like to result an outcome of in our work. And so my understanding was that's the scope of the protocol that we're developing. I could be wrong, happy to be corrected.
I don't think you're wrong at all. Before I turn it to Member Andrews, I think that's a really good description of what the committee is meant to do, but also, of course, we have a role in the planning process all the time as a city. And so if we're in neighborhoods where we see a food desert or a food swamp, and we want to, engage in a conversation around, well, how can we ensure that we do something about this? Or there's services that are missing that are municipal services like parks or other kinds of things missing. How can we as a city advocate as part of a private development to ensure that we get those community benefits if there aren't city infrastructure projects that are happening at that time? So it's partnering with, right? So how do we partner with folks to make sure these things happen? Member Andrews, did you want to, as the Hamilton Community Benefits Network representative?
Certainly. So through you, Chair, when this committee was originally envisioned, it was to ask these questions, which is really good that Councillor Cattison and yourself, we don't know what community benefits are going to look like in Hamilton yet. We haven't decided. That's what we're here to do over the next 4, 6, however long this process takes. Toronto's working on year 8, and they still haven't got a fulsome community benefits across the entire departments, across the city, across all the areas that community benefits can encompass. And I would suggest through you, Chair, to Councillor Cattison, that your question around community benefits and developments has some great examples in Ottawa. There was a Manor Park redevelopment that was done where they did an entire secondary plan to rezone what was ostensibly a privately owned rental townhouse complex and embedded community benefits through through a process with the City of Hamilton and the developer where they rezoned and upzoned and added additional density in exchange for the developer signing a memorandum of understanding with the City of Ottawa to provide a no displacement policy, to provide increased density, to provide affordable housing. And those are just some examples. So I think what's going to, I hope through the chair that what we're going to do is as we're slowly unpacking this process, we're working with McMaster Research Shop right now to do a jurisdictional scan, which was mentioned in the information report. So we're going to have 6 or 7 students doing a fulsome jurisdictional scan. There are also a lot of social enterprises that do consulting and work in this field. I think that we're going to, all of us, explore what it's going to look like for the City of Hamilton and what areas we can expand on. I think it's easiest for us to start, like with the motion that we'll be speaking to later, with some aspects of, as Councillor Nan mentioned, city capitals, city procedure, because those are things that we have direct control over, and they're policies that can be set, whereas other elements of community benefits, like we mentioned, an individual development, come down to negotiation with the residents and the people who are affected by that development. So they're not as easy to shape as a one-off policy. Like procurement, we can set a policy for that. The City of Hamilton can undertake that. However, if we're looking at an individual development that you're mentioning, and there's a rec center or a park space or a mandate for something, those have to be done on a singular basis. So they might be different. There might not be able to be an overarching policy that we can establish that gives instructions to staff. I hope that clarifies through the chair, at least from community benefits perspective.
Yeah, I think that was a very fulsome response. Councillor Chattison.
I think I'm going to summarize it in my limited ability to understand. I think what we're doing here is we're attempting to look at leveraging our position as a city in order to make complete communities, basically, right? Okay, I get it. Thank you.
And to provide, just to add to that, and also to provide opportunities for trades and other kinds of folks to be involved in certain kinds of projects, right? So there's a framework we're developing here, I think. If you don't mind taking the chair, Vice Chair Andrus, I just wanted to make a comment about this. I think from my perspective, we've pretty well defined or understand, as Member Andrus was just saying, what it might look like through a procurement process, how the city's own infrastructure projects could be done with community benefits in mind. That's an internal conversation in a kind of way. We're talking to ourselves when we're having that conversation. And so that's about developing a policy. But we also need to have a policy, and this is, I think, where my interest will be on this committee. We also need to have a policy that structures who in this organization is responsible for those conversations with private developers about community benefits and how those are structured. A dream of mine is that in this term of council, Hamilton has its first community benefits agreement in place. I think the opportunity to do that actually happens more so in those more individualized conversations. And I'll give you an example that I don't think is going to materialize into realities, but it'll clarify my point. It's not really something we can do, but it's an example of an idea. You have a Corktown Plaza is being redeveloped right now. That's going through a very long redevelopment process. And over the course of that process, residents have come forward for the last almost, I guess, decade saying, there's things missing from our community. We don't have community space to hold meetings. This is a bit of a food desert and a food swamp at the same time. For those who aren't familiar with the term food swamp, I should say, food desert I think is a little bit more explanatory, meaning there's not food options. Food swamp is often a situation where there are not necessarily a broad enough variety of foods so that everybody can meet their nutritional needs, right? So that's sometimes a situation where you have only a very focused or narrow foods in the communities that are available, and people don't have enough choice or variety to be able to make healthy nutrition choices. So there's two things going on there, and I think how can the city be involved in those discussions in terms of saying, well, what do we do here in this situation to create a community space? We recognize as a city, we haven't actually provided community spaces in this neighborhood serving 4,000 to 6,000 people. And that's something we ought to be doing. How do we partner with this developer to ensure that that is part of the mandate, and what do we negotiate to make that happen? So I think we need a framework and a protocol around that piece of it. It's very important to me because we're seeing so much density right now, and this council's made the decision to say we're going to do densification inside the current urban boundary. Okay. Let's get ready for the fact that many, many, many other people are going to be here, and we're really going to need to ensure that we have more amenities in our neighborhoods, public washrooms, the list goes on. How do we do that? So I'm hopeful that we can build up a protocol that takes that into consideration as well. So those are my only comments, and I'll take back the chair. At this point, I'm not seeing more discussion on this specific report, so I will ask everyone to vote on receiving it. All those in favor?
In favor?
Anyone opposed? The report has been received. And we're on to notices of motion now, and Councillor Nan, you have a notice of motion if you'd like to introduce your notice of motion. I know it's been sent around.
My apologies, Chair. I did have a quick question just before I put forward the notice of motion, and that is to clarify as a subcommittee how we are advancing the work of the subcommittee. So at some point, whether as chair you want to give comment to that, or if we want to open that up as a discussion point, I just think it would be beneficial to just be very, very clear as a committee what we're focusing on in order to give us a clear mandate for our agendas as a committee moving forward, aside from receiving reports that have been requested already inside this meeting. So that is just a side note.
It's okay. Can we address your side note first before we get
Sure.
to the motion?
Yeah,
I know we have a general information other business section at the end, but just to expedite this so we're staying in the same thematic ballpark, it really does relate to the previous report in some way or form. So I'm just going to let that happen and we can have that conversation. I think it's worth discussing. I think these meetings are called at the chair sort of behest. I'm not going to be weird about that. So if other members would like to call a meeting, like just send me an email and we can do that. But I think in order to do that, in order to have business to advance, you're right, we have to have an understanding of what that looks like. So perhaps if you had comments or questions about that, Councillor Hand, you could ask those now.
I guess my question is, the previous discussion for me summarized two very clear areas for work that committee members are interested in pursuing. One is the mandate of this committee, which is focusing around community benefits that could be integrated into city infrastructure and capital projects. That's one bucket. The other bucket being the discussion around private development advancing community benefits across the city. And so I'm just curious about how that work is going to begin and continue, and if those are defined outcomes for this subcommittee in terms of our agendas moving forward.
That's a good
we
question.
discuss each one of them? Like, is the next meeting going to have the first bucket and the second bucket is agenda items, and we discuss it in a fulsome way?
Yeah, I think you're suggesting kind of two things here. One might be looking at the terms of reference and being a bit more specific about that, so bringing it back to amend the terms of reference at our next meeting. But also, yes, how we're actually going to advance this work and create this protocol so that we have something that we can use as a tool. And so is that going to be done by committee members coming forward with things? Is it going to be done by staff who are going to be reporting back on sort of discussions here? So it's a very fair question. I'll put that to Director Elder for now, and perhaps in between this meeting and the next one, we can deliberate on what we want to do. This is a new experience and a new process and a new committee, so I'm mindful of not trying to be too instructive here, and I let this evolve in a way that makes sense for everybody here. So, Director Elder, if you had comments, it'd be helpful.
Yes. Bonnie Elder, Director of Ontario Works. I realize I was remiss in introducing myself last time. So I would just maybe build on the comments that Carl made around, and to your point, this is a very large undertaking. There is a lot of information, and there will definitely be a need to focus around the things that are identified by this subcommittee as being a priority. One of the first things, as Carl identified, the benefit of having some students do environmental scans, being able to bring back to this subcommittee what some of the work that's being done in other municipalities for consideration around what could or what would want to be included within that. I would say there is also an opportunity for this subcommittee to direct, if they wish to have some of the other things that were identified in this initial report as put forward as a priority to be brought back to this subcommittee for information purposes to help direct where the next steps should be. I would also take this opportunity to introduce on the line is Carrie Brooks Joyner, who will be the director taking the lead on this work going forward. She will be looking at identifying whether there's some staff availability to help bring those pieces together and bring some reports back to this subcommittee. I think from there, it will be up to the subcommittee to determine exactly which pieces they want to direct staff to go away and bring more specific information about. But those pieces of framework will allow this subcommittee to identify, as Councillor Nan said, some of the things that you all want to be a priority for inclusion within this. I think scope creep could become a very difficult thing to manage, so that might be my suggestion based on this report as well as to the next steps.
Thanks, Councillor Nan. Is that helpful?
That's helpful.
Great.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, so it looks like what I understand is that upcoming meetings, we're going to have some more inputs about what's happening jurisdictionally with committees of the similar nature in other places, and then talk more in depth about what we want to see as outcomes for the work we do here. I would say, just as one kind of note in passing about scope creep, I don't see a planner in the room. And I do think at some point we need to have someone from the planning department, either not necessarily in the room, but someone as part of the discussion when it comes to that second piece I was referring to, because I know that what we do is we tend to define community benefits in the scope of the Planning Act and what it says in section 47. But the sense I have from both the community members here and others is that we're looking at this a little more holistically and more broadly than that. So not to say that it's solely defined by what the Planning Act lets us do, but also talk about other kinds of things that are available for us to do in terms of negotiating community benefits. So broadly speaking, right? And so I just wanted to mention that. I saw Member Andrews had their hand up, so I'll turn to you as well, and then Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. So one of the other just to speak to this that I'm excited about from this committee is the idea to also, and this will speak to Councillor Nan's motion coming up, is to prototype ideas with very singular one-offs, just so that we can get an understanding of how they function within city departments, so they don't overwhelm staff, so that we get a sense of what's possible. As through you, Director Bonnie mentioned, this is a big undertaking. The City of Toronto currently has, I think, 26 staff in a community benefits department, and they have not even finished the process on their roadmap of what they want to do within that. They've only started with some pilot projects with their Toronto Housing Corporation, with a few of their recreation centers, a few of their project undertakings, Woodbine Casino, and some very light social procurement policy around supporting racialized and women-owned businesses. So they're although much farther along the process than we are. I think getting a scope of what other communities are doing and then piloting some of the ideas that this committee has, whether that's through an example for not Corktown Chair specifically, but whether there's an example that members of this committee bring forward that we can prototype an idea with to lay a foundation for staff to work with just that particular idea. I think I just don't want to, this is a big undertaking and we really need to get this right. Hamilton's a large corporation, and it's taken Metrolinx 15 years to refine their community benefits protocols, and there's still some challenges. So I don't want to rush this committee's work to get everything done in the next few months. That's all. Thank you, Chair.
Fair enough. And I'll say before I turn to Councillor Wilson that as a chair, I'm going to do my best to steward this in between meetings and make sure that we're coming with a focused agenda going forward, because I do think that this is our first meeting. I didn't know I'd be the chair, and so didn't want to presume that and meet with staff in advance, but happy before the next few meetings to do that and try and continue to collectively bring our feedback to conversations so that our meetings are getting us going forward regardless of how long it takes us. Councillor Maureen Wilson, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I appreciate the discussion so far. I think I got clarity on where I was going to go. So the scan will inform the possible, and the possible will help inform our priorities. And I do like Member Andrus's comment about probably dipping into the possible sooner or later. I'm just personally speaking not interested in making this a doctoral thesis over the course of my life. I do think we need to get going. But my question is, if we have questions moving forward, I think it has been identified that do we channel those to Director Carrie Brooks Joyner, who is the staff lead, so that we're not wasting folks' times and that we're having a coordinated effort on the other end of the table. Thank you.
Good morning, and through the chair, Carrie Brooks Joyner. I'm the new Director of Strategic Initiatives in Healthy and Safe Communities. And this is week 2 on the job and just a few hours into this file. But yes, certainly funnel your questions through me, and I can function to triage them to the appropriate staff and get back to you. Happy to be supporting this very important committee.
Well, thank you. Congratulations, or my condolences on your appointment, and looking forward to working with you on this matter. Thank you.
I'll take both. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you very much. And I see Member Nikolskaya wanted to jump in. Go ahead.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, Violetta Nikolskaya, pronouns she, her, from the Hamilton Community Benefits Network. I hope that these comments are appropriate at this point in the conversation, but in the spirit of what the councillor had brought up with regards to the realm of possibility, I think something I'm really hoping to hear from these conversations as we move forward, and also in the spirit of what you had said, Director Elder, regarding information that I'd like to hear from the incredibly esteemed folks I see across the aisle, is what is in the realm of possibility. I don't know what I don't know, and you folks are incredibly well versed in conversations you've had with developers, with private developers, and just generally. And so when I consider where council has directed for the purpose of this committee to examine things like social procurement, I'd love to know in the future, and I'm saying these things in a vague way, not to assert emotion. I'm a little too shy at this time to assert emotion as to what I like to recall back, but to understand what the temperature is when you folks have spoken to private developers about their opinions and thoughts about social procurement, especially under the realm of the federally directed targets as to what social procurement should elicit. So I'd love to hear what that looks like, what the current temperature in this community is, because if I have a sort of ambitious thought as to what can be achieved, that's not within the realm of possibility, and we're going to have that cyclical nature where we're not going to have something grounded in realism. And I'd like for there to be realistic, effective outputs and outcomes from these conversations. So I'd love to hear that in the future. And in relation to that as well, within the realm of possibility, there's a comment in the report about ways in which city spending can be leveraged. And so what techniques have been used in the past, which were effective, what barriers occurred at that time. I'm sure reports exist that respond to the questions that I'm raising right now. I'd love for those to be uncovered, erected, to be put forward here. Or if there are comments that you have that are unique or nuanced to that haven't been documented in a report, I'd love to hear that conversation as well. So I hope that these remarks are within the spirit of this particular item that we're discussing, but that's something I'd love to see in the future.
It looks like we never really did finish with the last item, and the conversation continues, and I appreciate that. Even though we received it, it's been informally unreceived and re-received, so thank you for that. I do think it's important that we do bring exempla here, right, which is what I think everyone's saying is when we have folks, I think you said from City Lab who are working on this, when we see some examples come forward, and also just like going to other municipalities' reports too and pulling some stuff forward to talk about it. I think some of the work we're going to do here is learning. We're going to be learning here a lot about what this looks like and how we move it forward. So appreciate the spirit of all the comments. On that note, we will move to notices of motion, and Councillor Nan, it is now the time.
Okay, on the topic of a notice of motion, I did circulate it, and thank you to our clerk who also passed it around. In the notice of motion, my goal is to waive the rules today only because it is timely as the municipality is kind of moving along in the process as it relates to our new Hamilton Transit Maintenance and Storage Facility in Ward 3. So the whereas clauses is simple. It's just stating the facts that the City of Hamilton is undertaking a significant public infrastructure project under contract number C13-02-23, a requirement for a general contractor to construct a new Hamilton Transit Maintenance and Storage Facility in Ward 3. And whereas the construction of the second Hamilton Transit Maintenance and Storage Facility is a project which will benefit Hamilton's future transit initiatives for overall benefit to the city. Therefore, be it resolved, be that staff be directed to work collaboratively with the contractor who, where practical and appropriate, will ensure that socially and environmentally responsible business practices are considered when employing workers and completing the work. B, that whatever measures are taken by the contractor will result in zero cost overages to the approved project budget. So first, I'm looking to and seeking to waive the rules, and then happy to speak to the motion, should it be committee's will to entertain it today.
Okay, and I think at this point we need a seconder to waive the rules. So if somebody wants a second to waive the rules so we can consider this as a motion. I see Councillor
I'll second. Mark Elliker.
Okay, since you haven't seconded something, we're going to go with Member Elliker. So seconded by Member Elliker that we waive the rules. We'll have a quick vote on that. All those in favor of waiving the rules so we can consider Councillor Nan's motion?
In favor.
Thank you, Member Elliker. I appreciate that. That's everyone. Okay, Councillor Nan is the mover, and do you want to keep the same seconder? Or are you okay to second these, the motion itself, Member Elliker?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
So through you, Chair, then. Part of the reason why the language in the motion direction is directing staff to work collaboratively with the contractor is because we're kind of beyond the stage in the tendering process to be more prescriptive in exploring the breadth of what could be possible. That said, I think that this also shows an example of how could we be advancing the work of achieving these outcomes outside of agreements and outside of a protocol, and use this as a learning opportunity to say, how did that conversation go? And give us a specific case study as a committee to be able to look at in terms of, you know, once this tender goes, whatever the status is of the negotiations prior to finally enabling the contractor to mobilize, that we're able to work with them in a collaborative way as a municipality to land some of those local jobs, and ideally working with some of the players around the table in a proactive way so that we can start shaping out what this looks like. So that's the primary motivation, and it's timely because of the fact that the project's already underway in terms of the contract. Thank you.
Anybody else want to comment on this motion before we go to voting on it? I'm not seeing anyone, so we'll go to vote on the motion. All those in favor?
In favor.
Okay, I see everybody. That motion's carried, and that takes us to the end of today's agenda. If there's no other general information or other business, I'll have a glance around in case anyone is excited to provide some. Not seeing any excitement. Oh, Councillor Tattison, there was an excitement, pardon me.
Just a question around kind of what Councillor Wang was alluding to, and something that Vice Chair Andrews said about learning through the doing. And if we're going to advance some pilot projects, I have some great examples that I would like to advance, and I would just like to understand when the appropriate time to introduce something like that would be.
That's a good question. I think we ought to be cautious about, making this become a project committee where we come here and the members of this committee specifically and only are starting to put forward projects that might otherwise be in the realm of the budget process, might be in the realm of some other kind of thing. So I think let's be cautious about that. I think because this is a city infrastructure project that's already been defined and has already been scoped and is going to be undertaken, Councillor Nan's specific motion is about that, and about seeing if that can be something as an example we use on the city side. But to Carl's point earlier, to Member Andrews' point earlier, there may be a point where particular developments come forward as we can speak about them here. So I think, again, the planning department might be useful as a resource as we develop this. But I think should be mindful of us putting sort of the cart before the horse here. So let's maybe have that conversation offline, Mark, and try and I'm trying to keep this as informal as possible because I think, again, this is learning and we have members of the community here. But I think let's maybe just talk about that offline, about the scope.
I agree.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. I don't see other hands for folks who have general information or other business, so we'll go on to adjournment. May I please have a mover and a seconder to adjourn? Councillor Taddison and Councillor Huang. All those in favor of adjourning, please indicate.
In favor.
Okay, I'm not seeing anyone opposed. Before I actually say the magical words, I just want to thank everybody for being here today. Thanks to staff, thanks to members of the community, and thanks for your confidence in me being the chair. I'll do my best to steward this work forward. Otherwise, we are adjourned, and we'll see you again probably soon. Have a great day.
Thank you.